Hello again, Bat fans. It is with a heavy heart that I present to you the last Batgirl story. 4 years have passed since Batgirl confronted her worst enemy, a mercenary by the name of Cormorant, who was hired to kill Batgirl and almost succeeded. That moment has haunted Barbara for years, and it comes back again when a man is killed at the Gotham Library, stabbed with a knife. Barbara assumes that the killer is Cormorant, trying to send her a message. When the police arrives, Barbara allows them to investigate, while she goes to the library's computers and investigates on her own. She discovers that the victim is connected to Cormorant, and her suspicions are confirmed. Barbara returns home to prepare all her equipment to go out as Batgirl, but even though all her gadgets are ready, she is the one who is not ready to confront her old enemy. Barbara goes to bed, hoping that her past demons disappear. The next day, Barbara is reunited with her childhood friend Marcy, who has arrived to Gotham to visit Barbara. Marcy tries to talk Barbara out of being Batgirl, because she knows the secret and she cares for Barbara, but Batgirl is still needed out there. In fact, the criminal claims more victims, all of them killed with knives, and all of them with criminal records for abuse and violence against women. However, this time Barbara is wrong. The killer is not her enemy from the past, but instead is a woman only known as Slash. Barbara doesn't know this, and she goes to Cormorant's home to take a close look at her enemy. Much to her surprise, Cormorant is married and his wife shows signs of domestic violence and abuse. However, he is not doing anything illegal, and Batgirl is forced to return home, where she finally learns about Slash. Moments later, Cormorant gets a phone call, and he is hired to kill Slash, but at that same moment, Cormorant's wife hires Slash to kill him. Meanwhile, Barbara and Marcy keep discussing about the dangers of being a vigilante, but Barbara makes up his mind and goes to check on a possible victim of Slash, although she still believes Cormorant is somehow responsible. That night, Batgirl confronts Slash, who claims that she only wants real justice for criminals who abuse women and get away with it. Batgirl cannot allow Slash to kill more men, and the two of them fight, but Slash proves to be superior in combat and Batgirl is stabbed in the shoulders and knocked unconscious for a few minutes. This is enough for Slash to kill her victim and escape through the window. Batgirl recovers slowly and tries to follow Slash, but her attempt is completely pointless. She is in pain and her whole body is weak. She tries to jump to the nearby rooftop but fails miserably and falls down to the street. With all her remaining energy, Batgirl climbs back to the rooftop, but she is overwhelmed by fear and doubt, and she decides that Batgirl is through. Just a few minutes later, Barbara stumbles back to her apartment, and as she collapses in the living room, she tells Marcy that she quits. Marcy takes care of Barbara's wounds, and she is glad that her friend is finally giving up being a hero. However, she doesn't know that Barbara plans to go out one last time to confront her most dreaded enemy. Barbara puts on the costume and goes out to face the ultimate challenge, but on her way there, she decides to check on the streets of Gotham to make sure she can help some people in need. Sadly, every time Batgirl spots a crime or someone is asking for help, other heroes beat her to the places and every case is solved without her help. Like this, Barbara comes to the realization that she might actually not be needed in Gotham. With that in mind, Batgirl goes to confront Cormorant, who arms himself with a shotgun and takes Batgirl out of his home. At that moment, Slash shows up and stabs Cormorant from behind. The situation soon turns into a fatal three-way battle. Batgirl uses some smoke grenades from her utility belt, and in the confusion she stabs Slash before she could stab Cormorant. Batgirl then has to confront Cormorant, but this time she is not afraid, and she gives him the beating of his life. Batgirl shows that she is superior in close combat, and that's why Cormorant tries to grab a gun to kill Batgirl. At that moment, Cormorant's wife gives a gun to Slash, and she kills Cormorant, ending her mission before she passes out. With all her enemies out of action, Batgirl awaits until the police arrives to take everyone, and once the situation is in order, she goes back home where she finally tells Marcy that Batgirl is officially retired. Barbara decides that she can still help, but there is no need to constantly risk her life. The decision is final, and Barbara looks forward to her future life without Batgirl. The last Batgirl story is an emotional ride. For the most part, it's sad, because we have to say goodbye to one of Gotham's best-known heroes. In the Silver Bat, we learned how Batgirl was created, and now, 20 years later, she is gone. The point is, you don't just say goodbye to a friend of 20 years just like that. So, the story is based upon events that happened in the Batgirl stories of the Bronze Age. This enemy, Cormorant, was indeed a mercenary hired to kill Batgirl, and in Batgirl's last story, this event is the biggest trauma of her life. Now, there is a very dark coincidence about that original story. Cormorant used a little girl to lure Batgirl into his deadly trap, and even though Batgirl eventually stopped Cormorant, the little girl was traumatized by the event and she ended up paralyzed from her waist down. That is very creepy and ominous. When we remember the history of Barbara Gordon, this coincidence gives you the feeling that there is a dark force manipulating things. This story happened in 1980, more than 8 years before DC created Oracle. It's a very dreadful thought. So let's not focus much on that and let's go back to the main story. Overall, it's a bittersweet experience. On the one hand, we get to see Barbara moving on with her life, which is very rare with superheroes in comics. But on the other hand, we have to say goodbye to Batgirl, one of Gotham's protectors, and it's sad to say, but in her last story, Batgirl doesn't shine. What I mean by that is that Cormorant was not stopped by Batgirl. He was killed by Slash. So the biggest enemy of Batgirl, the man responsible for her biggest trauma, is stopped in the end by a random new character. And not only that, in this story Batgirl makes a lot of bad judgment calls and gets to the wrong conclusion because of her past trauma. She is sure Cormorant is the killer, while everyone in the city knows otherwise. And what hurts the most is that this was all intentional. The story needed to show us Batgirl at her lowest point in order to justify why she decided to retire in the end. That's why she makes mistakes. That's why she is not the hero in the end. This story was designed in order to give us the idea that Batgirl was just not needed anymore. The moment when Batgirl cannot stop a single crime because other heroes get there first is very sad. DC was basically showing us how unnecessary Batgirl was. And the most shocking thing about everything is that the writer of this story was in fact Barbara Randall, the only writer who cared about Batgirl. But how do we know she cared? Well, to begin with, she was the writer who did the new origin for Batgirl. She also wrote a couple of Batgirl stories in the Bronze Age, and in this story, it shows that she knows the history of Batgirl in comics. So why did she come up with this story that makes Batgirl look so bad? Well, there is a reason. Barbara Randall developed this story around the concept of a woman vigilante who kills men that have abused women. This entire story is about violence against women. I think it's a very strange topic for a superhero story, especially for the last story of a well-known character. So why did she use this strange concept? Well, there is a reason. One of the most shocking facts is that this last Batgirl story is the only appearance of the character since DC rebooted her origin, just the previous year. So why DC gave Batgirl a new origin just to have her retire in the next year? Why didn't she make any other appearances in other comics except for this story and just to retire? Well, for all those questions, there is a reason. The fact that this is Batgirl's only story since her new origin, and that this is the story where she retires, is not a coincidence. At the very end of this story, there is an advertisement promoting the next big graphic novel that DC was about to release, just a few days after this story was published. It was The Killing Joke, the story that has been called the definitive Joker story, one of the most influential and important Batman books ever published. And we all know how it ends for Barbara Gordon. In fact, everyone at DC knew how it was going to end for Barbara, and for this reason, DC asked Barbara Randall to create the last Batgirl story, because they all knew the fate of Barbara after the Killing Joke. Batgirl would be no more. And that is the dark and only reason why this story happened. DC really didn't need Batgirl at all, except to make her retire, preemptively preparing for what was coming after the Killing Joke. They didn't create a single story for her since her new origin, and with a twist of irony they hired Barbara Randall to come up with the last Batgirl story. She was the writer that came up with her origin, and she cared about Batgirl, but that didn't matter to DC. The Killing Joke was a bigger project, and Barbara Randall had to create a story to send Batgirl out of action. I think that was very cruel on DC's part. And now we understand why Barbara Randall created this story around the theme of violence against women. That was her way to make a statement. She didn't like what DC had planned for Batgirl, but she couldn't give up the chance to write the last Batgirl story, and so she did, inserting a big message about victimizing women. That was the only way she had to express her discomfort with the future of Batgirl. With that context in mind, I think that it's very powerful, it's very strong, and it's very unfortunate because not many people know about this story, and even if they do, they don't have the proper context to understand it entirely. It's a shame, because in this story, Barbara Randall presented us for the first time the idea that Barbara Gordon was also a technological genius and an expert with computers. It's almost as if she knew that they couldn't keep her character out of action, and she started the concept behind Oracle, the new identity for Barbara Gordon. Many people can say that this story didn't have a lasting impact on Barbara Gordon, but I think otherwise. Besides the first concept behind Oracle, this story also showcases the Batgirl doll from her childhood, a souvenir that Oracle always keeps around close to her as a reminder of her great history as Batgirl. Even though this story makes me sad because of the poignant moments, I still like it very much. Not because of the story, but instead for what it represents. This issue is a fantastic reminder that everything that happens in comics happens for a reason, and sometimes the reasons are very dark. And that's why in the next episode we will check out the darkest of reasons. So make sure to come back for the Killing Joke.